Oh, hey there, everybody. I was sitting in the room early and I had another screen open. I popped back over and I was like, oh, there's 5 people here.
Hi.
I just a few minutes ago added myself to the agenda via PR. So if somebody who can accept that PR and wants to merge that in, that would be great.
Already done.
Thanks, Benji.
Looks like we're still waiting. Looks like we're still waiting for a couple more folks to join us. So just give it another couple minutes. Okay, welcome everyone. We were expecting another couple of people, but it looks like they are either running late or maybe they won't make it. So let's get started. By joining this meeting, we've all agreed to the specification membership agreement, the participation guidelines, the contribution code, and the code of conduct. Links to all of these can be found in the agenda if you need a refresher. First of all, I'd like us to go around and introduce ourselves. We'll do it in the order that is in the agenda. However, I'll start as I'll host this meeting until Lee turns up. Hello, everyone. I'm Benji. Alex.
Yeah, I'm Alex. I'm at Pronto AI, here to talk about client control nullability.
Hey everyone, I'm Kelvin. I'm at Apollo. I work on the Apollo iOS framework. Yeah, I'm also here to chat about CCN.
Hi, I'm Benoit from Apollo, working on Apollo Kotlin.
Hello everyone, my name is Martin. I'm working with Benoit actually on Apollo Kotlin. I did a very last minute item to the agenda about SDL and how to write schema in SDL form. So if we have time, I'm happy to talk about it. And in all cases, I'm also super curious to hear about CCN. So I'm happy to be here.
Hey, everyone, I'm Rob.
Ivan's next.
Yeah, Matt is not on the call. Yeah.
Yeah.
My name is Ivan, and I'm also from Apollo.
Hey there, and I'm Anthony. I'm also from Apollo. Looking forward to a conversation today. Looks like currently we're missing Lee and Matt, who I assume will show up at some point soon.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Had a few slight audio issues here, which have now been resolved. Okay, so first of all, if anyone can help with the notes, that would be excellent. It's the same note stock as we have been using for the last few meetings. So please go ahead and contribute there. I've added a title to the top of the file, so you can carry on from there. The first thing to do is to review the agenda. So we're going to have a quick summary of the previous meetings. We're going to look at some of the previous meetings action items. I think they may have been filed. And then we're going to move on to having an update on the client-controlled nullability proposal from Calvin, and then looking at the SDL emissions from Martin. Does anyone have anything that they feel we should be adding to the agenda, or anything else like that that they would like to comment on?
I just wanted to say that we're going to resume the incremental delivery working group meetings on Monday. They've been paused for a while, but starting up again next week.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rob. Okay, so we'll move on to reviewing the meetings. It looks like no one was at the secondary Asia Pacific meeting because Lee is the only person on the agenda. So I guess we can skip straight over that. And the same appears to be true for the EU meeting. Again, no one is in that agenda file. Well, that was easy. Let's have a look at the action items then. There's a couple that are up ready for review. So I'm going to open the first one of those, which is issue number 1335. Clarify the selection set in the example is a selection set and not a document. Okay, so this is an issue that was raised in a meeting end of last year, and no one seems to have progressed it for a while. There was a pull request from Roman, but it didn't gain consensus. So I think the proposal is, or my proposal is, either we close it and the issue, or we look for another champion or ask Roman to pick it up again. Does anyone have any opinions on this pull request? I'll drop the link to this issue into the chat. Well, if no one has any opinions on this for now, I guess I'll leave this one open and we can discuss it again at a future meeting. The next action item is, hey, everyone, can you review all of your old action items because we'll be garbage collecting them. And that was assigned to everyone, and that was assigned in March. So, hey, do that. We will close them. So I guess by the September meeting, if nothing's been done on these, we will go ahead and close those. Does anyone have any other action items that they feel that they've completed or made progress on that they want to share? No. Okie dokie, let's get into the meat of the meeting. So I'll pass it on to Calvin to talk to us about the client-controlled nullability proposal.
All right. Okay. Largely everyone that's in this meeting, okay, for starters, we have now formed a CCN sub-working group. We meet once a month. I think it is in the week before these main working group meetings. CCN proposal has gone dormant for a little while. It's been stalled, and we're looking to pick that up again and hopefully proceed it through the stages of the spec. So everyone that is at this meeting was largely there at the last one. I think it's just Rob and Ivan that may be new to this information, but for the purposes of everyone watching this recording, CCN has been stalled largely around two pieces of discussion. One being error handling and the other being null propagation. Now, I think they've reached the point at which they're very important discussions, but they're no longer important within the context of CCN alone. And I think we should be discussing them or tackling them external to CCN and advance them in other proposals or other RFCs. So the decision that was taken at the last working group meeting was to scale back the CCN proposal to really just the absolute basics, which at the moment is the bang operator, and try advance it that way. Get it into libraries, get it into production somewhere or into test apps, and gather feedback that way. As we need more complexity and we're looking to solve these things that come up in production, we can then layer on the stuff as it's needed. If they're not needed, that's great. Now, as I said earlier, like the discussions around the things that we're stalling it, there are other proposals. I think one of them is fragment isolation, if I'm not mistaken, that is useful in handling null propagation. I think there is other things to do with error handling. If those advance separately and they get put into the spec, if CCN advances and gets put into the spec, it will simply come along with the ride as to whatever those changes are with those. So I really wanted to bring this here to update you on CCN is alive again, what we've decided to do with the proposal, and then gather any feedback on what people think about stripping it back to really just the beginnings and going from there.
Thanks for that update, Calvin. It seemed like in the meeting we had a lot of discussion around, you know, the two significant open issues, and like Calvin said, kind of came to a realization that a lot of this stuff is not directly tied to CCN and perhaps can be addressed in other proposals in the future. I think that it was proposed that we move back to just using the bang operator and not including the question mark operator. I'm not sure if there's a better technical term for that other than question mark operator currently. But I feel like that wasn't, we didn't have a full consensus on that part. I think that what we definitely had a lot of agreement on was saying that we need to scale back all of the behaviors around error propagation and error handling, and bubbling and catching of errors. I wasn't clear if we felt strongly that the question mark operator should or shouldn't be included. It felt like the two options were either not include the question mark operator in this initial RFC and then move forward with that maybe as a secondary later on, or include the question mark operator, but only use it for just changing the nullability annotation of the field rather than as a catching operator. And I think that was the one part of it that we didn't really come to consensus on.
Yeah. So right now, the RFC itself has been stripped back to just the bang. The spec will follow. But if you look at I share concerns around the question mark, and I think it is useful if you go back to Lee's original point of raising it, which is to be the counterpart to bang, right? To change the nullability of non-nullability of something into being nullable for the client. I think that has value, and the two can go together. So yes, it's eliminating the use of a question mark as a null boundary from the RFC.
Right, but eliminating the question mark as a error boundary is different from eliminating the question mark completely, right? And it sounds like the RFC is now being stripped to remove the question mark completely. And personally, my concern is that that makes the bang operator in many cases almost unusable.
Yeah, I don't know about unusable. It's just, it feels half done. So currently it's just back to the bang. I wanted to hear Lee's opinion because he was the one that originally raised the question mark as being the counterpart to bang. I think it is useful just as a nullability modifier, not as like a nullability boundary. Sorry, null propagation boundary in the response. So we can go back and add the question mark, but I really wanted to hear other people's feedback. I mean, yours is one part of it. Does anybody else share the same opinion?
I like the question mark because it gives the client, I mean, it moves error handling out of the schema. Like there's a world where instead of defaulting to null everywhere in the schema, it's easier for backend developers to use non-nullable fields, and then clients can opt in error handling if they want to. So that's something that gets me pretty excited, but as long as we can add it after the fact, I'm good. I think the question here is, what is the primary goal? Like, maybe, do we want something to experiment with, or do we want something? I mean, it's a usual chicken and egg issue. If we just want something to experiment with, maybe we can start with exclamation mark, and we don't need the full consensus. Excuse if it's I'm new to this, so I'm not 100% sure about the process there, but I guess the question behind this is, what does it take to get this into GraphQL JS and start iterating with CCM?
Yeah,
So-
thanks, Martin. Oh, go ahead, Kelvin.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that it seems like we're past the phase of like needing something to experiment with. Like we have gotten some pretty good, implementation of a lot of this stuff already in an experimental branch. And we've played with it. It's a lot of talking through the expected behaviors of specific edge cases. So the big question is around the question mark operator being used strictly to just change the nullability of a field, and handling error propagation as if you have an error, it just propagates up to the next null field, whether that is a naturally null field or a field that has become null with the question mark operator, or if we want the question mark operator to be used as a catch for that specific error, so that when you use a bang, you need to use a question mark to indicate where you want that error to propagate to. Those are kind of the two options here. And the fact that we haven't come to a determination on that is what's led people to say, like, maybe we just keep the bang operator alone right now, and we don't do the question mark until later when we can get consensus on it. The other side of that, which is certainly what I fall on, and we talked about a lot at the meeting, was that we could use the question mark as that simple nullability version. And if we wanted to add some sort of catching behavior, that would be something we can then do in another proposal with some sort of @catch directive or some other way of handling that in the future. I'm kind of unclear on what the next steps here for us to actually move forward are on anything, though.
I want to raise a quick concern about question mark. I actually like the simplest approach, and I like to implement bank and question mark. One problem is that we previously discussed use cases, and for example, Relay team, they said like they will just strip bank and question marks and send like a query to server. And the same will happen for a lot of like proxies. So for example, if you use like without brand names, like for example, like schema stitching or like some GraphQL proxy, and this proxy implement question mark, and it stripped question mark before sending query to original server that don't implement question mark. That mean original server that actually execute query, it will blow up to the next node, send the result to a proxy, and proxy cannot like implement semantics of question mark. So bank is stricter. You can always get result of query without a bank and change it to match like a query with a bank. Opposite is not true about question mark. So if you get result of execution with question mark stripped and try to make it to change it, it's not possible to change it too much query with a question mark. So it creates a problem for proxies. Proxies or like for example, Relay. It's not only proxies. Relay also wanted to, at least they like in previous discussions, they said they want to strip it. So I'm kind of, yeah, it's created a problem.
So to make sure I'm understanding you correctly, are you saying you're leaning towards us wanting to include the question mark immediately because of the issue of like incremental support on different platforms being troublesome later on? Or are you saying it doesn't need to be there?
Yeah, I say like we'll immediately will have this problem. Like I expected, we release experimental feature, like some schema composition of like, okay, maybe federation server updates, implementing this feature, and there is no like, and you need to strip like new features when you proxy stuff to old servers. And we'll immediately be in this problem. We don't need to release experimental to discuss it.
Yeah, the proxy considerations are interesting, and those hadn't come up before. The relay argument, correct. They say they couldn't use it without other proposals like fragment isolation. And Matt was at the last sub-working group meeting, and his opinion was fragment proposals could help them. It could make it possible that they would be able to implement CCN, but without that, no, it's not possible for them to adopt it. I have to question whether that stops the proposal advancing, though. I don't know if we need consensus around every single client to be able to move something forward.
Just to expand on those two things, I believe the discussion with Relay was specifically about the bang being removed. I'm not sure that they needed to remove the question mark. Did anyone pick up on whether they actually did state specifically about the question mark that it needed to be stripped?
I don't think they want. Their argument was that they wanted it as a null boundary, so they were more arguing that it's a required counterpart to a bang being in the operation, not so much they wanted to strip it.
So my understanding is that because of because of the fragment boundaries, they would need to strip the bangs because otherwise errors thrown there would pass through fragment boundaries. So with the current proposal, assuming that we don't get fragment isolation, which is obviously a separate proposal, then they would need to strip the bangs. But my thinking is they would not need to strip the question marks. They can send them straight through to the server. So yeah, this is an interesting discussion.
By strip the bangs, what you mean is they functionally wouldn't do anything. Like they would just not support the CCN operators.
So
correct.
Users would write queries with bang. Relay would take those, would then remove the bangs from them, issue them to the server, bring the data back, write it to the cache, then reapply the bangs at that point before then bring it back out to the components.
I see.
Okay, it's resolved partially. One thing in this case, one thing is that is missing. There is no way to, based on introspection or something else, to detect if server supports blank or question marks. So we in a situation where like relay not stripping question mark, and you write a query and it's parsed and compile with relay compiler, all the validation are passed, and when you have runtime error.
I don't know how this works. Is there some sort of like header or something that indicates a version of the GraphQL spec that a server supports? Like once we've added this as part of the GraphQL spec, it should just be that we expect servers to start supporting it, right?
We like as far as I remember, we never added like anything to query syntax. Yeah, we added like box strings, for example, we can use in queries, but yeah, I don't think anybody, like, I think it would be the first big like addition to query syntax. We had the subscription, but for subscription it's easy. If schema implements subscription root, it's mean like you can use subscription, you can write subscription query. Other than that, like syntax was mostly the same as the release time. So like for everybody, for directives, if directive is presented, exist in schema, you can use it. But for knowability, there is nothing.
Has there ever been a situation in the past in which this has been a problem, where something has been added to the GraphQL specification that would make previous servers that were using an older version of the specification not be able to parse a valid query? How has this been handled before, or has it never come up before?
Well, when we added the subscription keyword, then if you file a query with the subscription keyword against a server that doesn't support it from an older version, it wouldn't even recognize it as a keyword.
Yeah, but you have subscription
value, right?
root. Yeah, but subscription root. So ESLint or like validator or relay compiler will catch it.
Yeah,
because you don't have subscription root.
Yeah, absolutely. So there have been things like that where the query isn't valid, but there's ways of detecting what that is. And I think that for other things, for example, like imagine that we didn't have include and skip, then you would be able to tell that they're supported because the schema explicitly states them because the directives are present. So for this, there would need to be some indication somehow in both the SDL and in the introspection that this server supports those that syntax.
Okay, this is something that we need to add to the RFC then, right? That needs to happen. So that's a great call out, Ivan. I think we can definitely add this to the CCN RFC, but that's a whole nother question we have to figure out an answer to now. Yeah. And I also sort of am feeling like this is the kind of thing that we really should have a overarching solution for any features in the future that change GraphQL syntax, some sort of versioning or something of your
feature flags.
Yeah.
I think for stuff like that, it should be actually, like, I remember one thing that is there, like box strings. Box string wasn't like with free quotation strings. Nobody used them, but technically you can write them and server wouldn't recognize them. Yeah, I agree. It's like it's top level thing. It should be like separate. It shouldn't be blocked. But like if we ever release it or make like PR or something, it should be like noted to people that if they upgrade the gateway, like or proxy or anything, they will potentially be in a situation where you propagate invalid query to downstream.
Martin?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to Ivan's objection about proxies and the question mark. Basically, if I understood correctly, what you said was if any of the downstream servers did not recognize a question mark, we need to strip them. But if we strip them, then the downstream servers cannot nullify these fields, and then it bubbles up, and then we lose some data. But is there a world where the downstream servers schemas do not match one with the proxy one? Like you could have a given schema with everything nullable in your subgraph or your downstream servers. And because there is stitching, there are directives there. Like at some point we need to assemble everything. So there could be a directive that says this field is nullable in the downstream server, but it's not to the proxy or something like this? Would that be something, a possible workaround to that problem?
Yeah, but I don't think, since you can apply question mark on anything, like literally anything, any field, even like introspection fields, all our introspection fields are non-nullable, for example. And we cannot change type of introspection fields. Yeah, so introspection is like edge case, but even if we forget about introspection, people have like subgraph or like something, they will stitch, federate, proxy it or something, and now you come to them and say like, please make everything nullable. And it's not only on their side, it's like they need to go through code base, through like all the resolvers, typing or like however they generate with like subgraph thing and change it. I don't think it's feasible. Like why I ask about feature detection is solution. What could be solution is that until every subgraph supports question mark, proxy say question mark is not supported. Yeah, this is like at least migration, not ideal migration path, but migration path.
Got it. Thanks.
All right, so I think it's less of a discussion, but we can take back to the sub-working group that to consider this aspect of proxies and the question mark, and then also recognize this need for like
feature flag.
Yeah, I think that's a big discussion to be had around.
Well, it's
yeah, but it's a separate feature. Like I totally agree, it should be separate feature, but yeah.
Yeah, it's, you know, there's the what Benji put here, this little code snippet. There's the possibility of doing something with an individual feature flag for it, but I also feel kind of concerned about having additional feature flags just continuing to be added, and then you end up with this situation where you have features that are dependent on other features that work together, and you have this issue of like having to continuously check for each thing. And if you have things like, you know, routers or proxy servers of any sort that have support for things that individual subgraphs don't have support for, how do you handle all of those things? It becomes a lot more complicated, and I wonder if it is better to version the scheme, the GraphQL specification. I mean, we already have, you know, the version by a date, and have servers indicate maybe even in the schema what version of the specification they support. So that way, if we add CCN in, you know, the October 2023 version of the spec, any server that conforms to this 2023 version of the spec has CCN, and we know that going forward in the next, you know, 2024 February version or whatever, that CCN is still always going to be there. You can't have a situation in which another new feature was added to a server, but an old feature was never supported yet. It becomes additive and incremental that way. Does that make sense?
It's an interesting idea, but I think it's not really viable for the. Because it means that we can't experiment with features because no one can support it until there is a cut version of the spec out. B, it stops the parallel iteration that we do in the spec where we're working on CCN and we're working on one of and we're working on this, which are better represented with features. But most importantly, and I think this is really the more important point, it means that we can't introduce like may features, or at least we don't support may. Your schema may support subscriptions, your schema may support non-client controlled nullability. If we have feature flags, your schema can say, yeah, I support client controlled nullability, but I don't support subscriptions or, you know, some other thing. So I think it's better overall. That said, I think we should be very careful with it. Like there is no need, for example, to indicate through the feature flags that one-of is supported, because there would be the one-off directive that already says that. And that will be the case for many different things. So it's only in the case where it's maybe a syntactical change or something like that, that cannot be represented through any other mechanism, by looking at a field in the introspection, by seeing what directives are available, by seeing what types are available. In those cases where it can't be told like that, that's, I think, where the feature flags would come in, only for that very narrow use case.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks,
There's-
Benji. I think there's a lot more. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there's also other things, like we did a lot in that area now, like the last couple of months. And there is like, we do now a multi-phase introspection to see really what features a server has. We check for single features. And there are also GraphQL servers, for instance, that don't allow aliases. That's why it's not anymore a two-phase introspection that we do, but we have to probe for certain things. So, I also 100% agree with, like, it's also the way we work on our server. It's not that we go and implement version X of this thing. We take one feature, we implement it. And then the GraphQL server implements that feature. So I think spec version is too big of a thing to probe for.
Okay, those are great proposals. So to take this back to CCN, the goal is to get this to the next stage in the RFC. It's currently at stage 1 proposal. To get to stage 2, we need to have what we consider a fully formed solution and consensus around that solution. So that's the main drive of stripping this back to the basics so that we can form consensus with just the very narrow scope of exactly what it is meant to do. We have implementations in GraphQL JS, both in v16, although I think it may be an old version of v16, and it's now in the newest v17 alpha, I believe. Alex, is that right? Did you and Young do the work for that?
Sorry, repeat the question.
Is the CCN changes for GraphQL JS, is that in the latest main tagged against 17, the latest alpha?
No, those are, I have a bunch of draft PRs up for. Are you talking about the stripped back version or the?
Yes, the stripped back version.
Yeah, I have a bunch of draft PRs up for validation, execution, and lexing and parsing.
Okay, so we're working to get that into the latest version of GraphQL JS. It is currently in Apollo iOS, but not on that latest version. So there'll be some work to do against there. And I'm not sure what else has implemented it, but those two should allow someone to have it working for them in an app.
Actually, I checked, like, we merged, I remember that we merged stuff, and we actually merged like IST and parsing. So
yeah, for the original version that included the question mark, lexing and parsing was merged.
Question mark. Okay. And the experimental flag.
Mm-hmm. I'll link the PRs I'm talking about in the chat. If you give me a second.
I don't want to extend this conversation too far. I don't think we should be making decisions on or diving deep into this feature flag stuff today, but I do think we need to be clear that it seems to me like CCN is directly blocked by this. And this is a brand new concept we didn't even identify until today, right? Do we need to, like, should we start a new RFC on some sort of way to handle indicating server capabilities and feature flags immediately?
Is CCN blocked on this for all clients or just advanced clients like Apollo and Relay? Like, could dumb clients use it?
I don't think it's a client side problem as much. Like, I don't think Apollo's necessarily blocked on it. I think it's that server side, especially proxies, are going to be blocked on this, right? Any sort of like federated graph is going to be blocked on this.
But simple servers and clients could still use it, yeah.
They can use it, but there would need to be some shared knowledge. So effectively, your server people need to tell your client people that they are or are not allowed to use it. And normally, it's the schema's responsibility to say, here are the things that I support. So a client, a user who in their VS Code or whatever, they write a bang into their query because they know they're allowed to do that in general, can now write a query. Maybe it can be code generated as well by something like GraphQL code generator, without that actually being valid against the server, because the SDL has no representation of whether or not the server actually supports that syntax. So I think it is a major blocking point, and I would not want to see this merged into the spec without some indication in both the SDL and in introspection that this new syntax was supported.
Benji, do you feel like, sorry.
The issue is also that language features, like if we had a field like that, that's not supported by older servers. Like you still would need to probe, even is there a language feature? Like, did we consider already having like a marker, a directive there on the schema or something like that? That we could just probe for these features there?
There was a proposal from Benji earlier in the chat. I can copy paste it.
Because that is the easiest way. It's there already. Yeah, something like this.
I don't know if we need to get deep into deciding what the right syntax and right way to handle this is in this meeting. I think that what we do need to put in the agenda, the notes, and really highlight here is that CCN, we can figure out both the error handling and the null propagation, or if we're going to just strip it back to only the bang, we can figure out all of that stuff. But this proposal is not going to move forward until we have made a decision on this language features or feature flags, whatever we want to end up calling it is. Benji, does that seem like something that should be its own individual RFC, or do you think we can do some sort of handling of that just in the CCN proposal? To me, this seems like something that's way too far reaching to be tacked on to the CCN proposal.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I personally think that it would be bundled in with this because this is the only thing that needs it right now, but we would have to put our future hats on and think about what other things might need this in future and design it in that way. But yeah, I think it would, there would be no value in merging that other RFC on its own, because the only indication it would have is that CCN is supported. Like that's literally the only feature, depending on what the solution is. If it's like a long list of feature strings, then maybe it does have value now. But assuming that it only indicates that CCN is supported, it has to go with CCN, I think, for now.
Okay.
Unless another RFC also comes up that also needs this, in which case they can squabble over who gets to introduce it.
Cool.
I wanna push back on the idea that this is necessary for CCN to pass. I think the group we have gathered here represents some pretty advanced clients that have to support an extremely wide range of use cases. I'm currently just a developer at work, and if I need a new thing in GraphQL, then I talk to the guy next to me and he does it, and then I implement it on my client. It's not that complicated, and if we started supporting CCN, he would say, hey, we're supporting CCN today, and then I would go and use it in the client. I think we're returning to the issue that we had prior to stripping back the RFC, which is that we're trying to support all of the clients and all of the servers, and blocking CCN on the support of all the clients and servers, and CCN would be supported by a smaller portion of the clients and servers up front, but then later that the pie would expand with these additional features. So that's sort of my concern.
Actually, I want to propose, like when I raise this issue, I raise it to explain why question mark is questionable, but it's not a fact bank. Like it's a fact bank, as Ben just said. If you use bank in a query and everything is good until you have runtime error, but it's not issue on a proxy. proxies is at least like in experimental stage can just strip it, and it's not big issue. So like for proxy to support like bank, you strip it independently if client supports bank or not supports, you just like strip it, and in that way you don't need to do feature probing. If you want to optimize and you're okay with feature probing that hot chocolate using like that type of stuff, you can do that. So bank is not an issue for proxies. It's an issue like with developer experience, as Benji showed, but it's not infrastructural issue. But question mark is. So I would say like question mark is kind of blocked, at least until we have a general idea if we want to add like feature flags at all. But bank is not blocked.
Yeah, Alex, I hear what you're saying. And I mean, it sounds like a couple of people are agreeing with this. Matt said it also may just be fine if the server doesn't support it. If the client fails, it just does, which isn't too terrible. But I do think there is something to be said about this being the first time that new syntax is being added in a way that you cannot understand from the schema if it is supported or not. And whether or not individual clients can work with individual servers at your company, the GraphQL specification is a document that indicates what GraphQL is and how GraphQL works. And having something in the GraphQL specification that says this is valid legal syntax, and having servers that purportedly support the GraphQL specification not having those things in them, and there's no way to indicate that, is, I think, a violation of the specification in general, and I think is against the goals of creating a unified specification for a networking protocol. I feel pretty strongly that we have to be able to indicate that I know we're using the same spec, so I know that if I make a request that works like this, any server that purports to use that specification can accept that as a valid request. And if it can't for some reason, there has to be some way for me to know that, outside of like two developers talking to each other at the same company.
Okay, maybe 15 minutes was a bit ambitious for this discussion. I feel like we have enough direction and feedback to take back to the sub-working group. Is there anything that anybody else wants to raise other than what we've spoken about so far in regards to CCN?
I just wanted to mention, I'm not sure if this has already been mentioned in the chat. In fact, I think it has to, as a scan, is another feature that would require this would be fragment arguments, because that's another syntax change that could be invalidated. So those two RFCs both would need, I think, this indication. And I think that how we've expressed it as syntax features rather than just general features is probably the right way of modeling this. And I don't anticipate that we would have altogether too many of them. So yeah, I think we can progress on that.
Does anybody know if this has been raised in the fragment arguments RFC?
Matt?
I think it has been, but that proposal hasn't gotten far enough where it's been a major deal. My attitude has also been just like, if a server doesn't support it, then the server will fail. And that's kind of like, we might want I do think that there's probably some value in a server being able to basically give you its version. and like, and or just like a bunch of directives that if they're defined on that server, it means that it supports these things. That all seems totally reasonable to me, but also like, it just doesn't seem horrible to allow requests to fail when the server doesn't understand a syntax that we've said now it's in the spec.
So
mm.
we basically convert, and you know, it's like we return back to Python. In Python, you can nothing bad about Python or JavaScript, like JavaScript without TypeScript. So like GraphQL is like TypeScript. If you wrote something, you have like immediate feedback. You see if it's valid or not. In JavaScript or like everything languages without types, you run and you see, and if you forget to click like with particular button in UI, or if you forget to open with particular tab, you would know it's like, yeah, you need to do like testing, but stuff happens. So I'm like, think it's like shift. Not in good direction, but yeah, it's not like it's developer experience. I would say.
Yeah. It's certainly not a blocker to us getting it experimentally into GraphQL JS. It's only the blocker from like, this is what we want to this is in the spec. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's like I would distinguish between strippable features and not strippable features. So fragment variables is strippable feature, right? You can convert.
Correct. It is possible for a client to compile. Well, in fragment arguments, I'm not at this point. I'm not 100% sure whether it'll be possible to do a pure conversion, but it should be. Like,
yeah. Or not strippable, but you can create some query, get some result, and you can massage result in a way that is correspond to client's query. Or you can break it and multiply. If some conflicts happening, you can at least like, there is some way for you to execute query on a server, maybe even like it's separate queries. And this is the case with bank, but question mark is not convertible, strippable in any shape or form. You just cannot do it.
So I personally think this is quite important. And also it ties quite nicely into, I think, what Martin will be talking about. Having seen Martin's issue raised the other day and discussed it a little bit on Discord, talking about how you can detect what features the schema has and other such things. So I think for now, let's switch over to Martin's agenda item and maybe come back to this other discussion if we have time at the end.
Perfect transition. Thank you very much, Benji. And also thank you for inviting me to this meeting. It's cool. So far. So let me do a quick intro of what I'm working on. So I said it already, I'm working on Apollo Kotlin, which is a client basically for Android. Like 95% of users are on Android, but people can use it everywhere Kotlin is used. And it works like Apollo iOS and like GraphQL CodeGen by doing code generation. So the user drops queries, like this is a somewhat large query, drop the schema in the code base, and then we generate stuff like this. Well, yeah, I don't want to go too much into detail. It's all generated code. You don't have to look too much into it. The thing is, the important thing for my point is we ask people to put either a SDL schema or an introspection schema in JSON form into the repository. And when we do so, we ended up not too long ago with this kind of errors here. Like, I don't know if everyone can see it. We can zoom in a little bit. Oh, I don't know how to zoom. Can everyone see it? All good?
Yep.
It's good.
So here there is like red underlines, like developers do not like this, and it says include directive, try to redefine existing directive. That's because the GraphQL plugin in IntelliJ here assumes that SDL is going to come without the built-in directive. And it's the same for, well, for all the introspection types. Like if I go here, the same thing, you got the idea. We, Apollo Kotlin, we need to know the version of introspection that's supported by the server, exactly the discussion we had before. But on the other hand, some tooling does not want them. And actually for very good reasons, because if you go to the spec, wait, I need to stop sharing this and go to spec. If you go to the spec, there is something, I think it's type definition, language. What is it? Language. Type system definition language. So there are explicit mention about this, especially, wait, where do I want to go? Yeah, when representing a GraphQL schema using the type system definition language, so SDL, built-in scalars must be omitted for brevity. Then we have the same for directives here, but we don't have anything for introspection types, which is my point. So it's tiny baby steps into making these features available to tools in general. Like if we add this to the spec, at least it will be explicit, and tools like the GraphQL IntelliJ plugin can react. Like if they see a SDL file that has the introspection types, not add their own on top of it, and if it is not, then maybe assume a given version of the spec or something like this. So that's a proposal. I can put the link in the chat here, and this is all I have.
Is it not a should be omitted?
So that's a very good question. I think I went with may, because it was like this for directives. If you look at directive, it's may.
I strongly feel it should be may for both for directives and for introspection types.
So
Yeah.
actually, we could do something very clever here, which is either you include none of the built-ins, similar to the schema, or if you include any, then you must include all.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Because that also would allow you to have a GraphQL server that, for instance, doesn't support floats. It's like none of the types I have no representation for floats. None of the fields I give you will have floats. None of my input objects have floats, or whatever we call them, double long, or yeah, I think we call them floats. But yeah, basically
floats.
like it allows you to have a stripped down SDL, and also 4 features, as Martin is pointing out, 4 features that are like, oh, we've added the directive, like the specified by directive. Like maybe that isn't actually supported by your server. You don't want to deal with supporting that, so you just omit it.
I love
I
this.
think that's a really good point. Now, I want to expand on a couple of these things that you've mentioned, Matt. One is for a server that doesn't support floats, if you don't support floats, none of your fields will be floats, and then it won't show up in the introspection anyway. It won't be in the SDL anyway. So we don't actually need to indicate that there is no floats. But for your second point with the specified directive, it would actually help to indicate whether you support the specified directive specified by versus whether you already had a specified directive that you defined yourself. And if the way to tell that is to see whether one of the built-in scalars is present, because those have to be, supported or whatever, then, I mean, at least one of them's got to be there, right? Yeah, string has to be there, because otherwise the introspection schema doesn't work, right? So if string is present, then you've opted into telling me everything about your schema. Otherwise, you've opted into brevity, in which case we keep the rules that we have. And I wanted to expand on that a little bit more as well, because I was talking to Martin about this over Discord, and effectively the point is the same as what I just described with Matt with the float. The reason that the introspection types aren't in the schema currently is because there's no entry point to them that is visible in the schema, because the entry points to them are the meta fields, and they are implicit fields, which means explicitly that they do not come through introspection. So type name, type, and schema, double under all of those, do not appear in the fields list. And because they don't appear in the fields list, the types that they use are not referenced anywhere in the schema. So there's no point to output them with the SDL. So effectively, I think what we'd be saying here is if we were to opt into the more verbose form, then we would also be exposing those entry points. And I think that that would also have value because it allows for us to add additional meta fields that don't currently exist. So I think there is a lot of value in this proposal if we push it in the right directions. I just wanted to surface some of that.
Yeah, and schema coordinates would be valid finally, because schema coordinates for top-level introspection fields. Like one big issue, are we really saying we need to inject like __ type name into every object?
I don't think so, and I think we could probably fuzz that one away. Specifically an exclusion for that one.
There might also be, we could potentially add to the schema object. So like the schema object could include a type in it that is like meta field, or just we have a meta fields type.
It's new entity. It's like a comma razor. We introduce new entities. I actually like the more I'm thinking, I'm like either for underscore everything with __ type name, because otherwise we create like 3 groups. Right now we have 2 groups. We have explicit fields and we have implicit fields. And now we would have like 3 groups. Explicit fields, implicit printable fields, and implicit non-printable fields, which is like also bad for comma razor. Instead of like 2, we have 3 types. Yeah, I'm like maybe __ type name. We don't add like description, and it's just like single line on every object type. And maybe we'll add like I think Matt, you wanted to add some field for field.
Yeah, we added, so we actually have, Relay has added an __ ID field for
Every
objects with
object,
identities. Yeah, which normally just aliases to ID, like the normal not __ ID, but we have a problem where we have types that have an ID that does not uniquely represent that type or that object. So we have to actually like do weirdly different things.
So your introspection have like for every object is have _ ID, or it's also implicit?
No, it's all
hidden?
implicit. It's all implicit.
Okay.
So we actually have a few. Yeah, we've got like 3 or 4 meta fields that are not part of the open source spec that are hidden because we have an ID field. We have like a key, a like cache key type field, and then a fetch key field, because those might not be the same. The fetch field might require like hundreds of bytes. But yeah.
So is there any action that can be taken here on this?
Can be much as is because like we basically turn in every conversation about like even small features into like snowballing. Like it starts with a small change and it snowball into big multi-year proposal. Like I think it's incremental step. It's not changing status quo. If it's set for directives, like we can say it for introspection types.
I think it is changing the status quo, though. I think the status quo is effectively that the SDL must be printed without the introspection types.
I also believe that change happened relatively recently. I think we used to allow the introspection types, or we used to allow not _ type name, but like the scalar and or scalar string and whatnot. I believe it was a relatively recent, like within the past few years, change that we said it must not.
I can provide example from GraphQL.js. GraphQL.js have like, it's weird. It have like two functions. So one function
You've got
is
the print
like
introspection schema, right?
Schema, yeah. So technically, it's existed, but a separate. Like on some occasion, I don't remember what was like a reason for it, but yeah, I remember it's experimental project. I actually like did like print introspection schema plus print schema thing to get like a full schema. Yeah, I needed it for to understand what is supported in a server, because I work with introspection queries in particular. I need to know like types for them. So,
but I think what Matt proposed is a good way out of the problem here, right? I think the _ type name for me would be also the thing that we could ignore or exclude of that. And then we have like every other field could be in the spec then in the schema.
Yeah,
and with that you have these. Yeah,
meta fields we can't put in the SDL because like unions are allowed to query for them, and you can't have fields on unions.
Yeah, that's why we should exclude the _ type name. But like the _ type and _ schema are fine because they are on an object type, guaranteed on an object type.
And you could also imagine if we were to expand and add, for example, namespaces in future, then in your introspection query, you could ask for a namespace, and then you could ask for a _ type within that namespace. So having that field be in multiple locations could, in a potential hypothetical future, make sense. I think that's a good idea. But I want to say that this, I think, is actually 2 separate RFCs. There is an RFC which says, what should the concise SDLB, which is effectively what Martin is doing in our PR for at the moment. And then there's the other one, which is what does the full SDL look like? And we don't currently have that. And that's going to be a much bigger change, I think. And my argument at the moment is that in Martin's current proposal, I would say that the concise form of the schema should not include the introspection types. So, because I think that is, I mean, that's what GraphQL.js does currently. I think that's what most things do. I don't tend to see introspection types in schema files unless it's been specifically engineered in a custom way to produce that, maybe for, you know, special powerful tooling. So I think I feel like it's a must to not have it.
Yeah, because then it makes sense with the second proposal here to have this like it's either there or it's not there, because then must makes much more sense. But if we don't go for must, it should be a should not be there. But yeah, must would be better, because then it makes really sense with the second version.
Must is making my problem worse, my immediate problem worse, because I can't go to the GraphQL IntelliJ plugin people and tell them to expect sometimes.
Yeah, but so you can, because like we do 2 PRs, and I mean we can already make the second PR.
Okay.
For that, and then
if everything comes at once, it's good.
Yeah.
But sounds like the second part is a lot bigger and might take longer to cook.
Because it needs to specify really what is in the full proposal.
Mm-mm.
But I mean, Benji, it's already there, and I think that if you say everything has to be in there, except underscore type name.
I think it's big in terms of you have to write a lot of words to explain exactly what the rules are. I don't think it's big in terms of actually changing algorithms. Like the algorithms are all basically there. So it is very much just is prose. We need a lot of prose there to explain exactly what's going on and why.
Yeah. It's also a challenge for implementation. I don't know what actually hot chocolate on everybody else doing. I know what's GraphQL.js doing. GraphQL.js, like
we do exactly what GraphQL.js is doing with the schema.
Yeah, so GraphQL.js pretends it's not fail, but it's ignore definition for introspection types for scalars, and
oh,
it just
you
like
mean when
no, like when you call build schema, when you build schema from SDL, we not fail, but we ignore those types and put our own types there, our own implementation there. But in reality, you should have like 2 functions. One function is for writing servers, and when you pass SDL with introspection types, it should fail. And second function is like build client SDL, which should create schema, but not executable schema, but with all the fields that exist in SDL and nothing more. So if your implementation, for example, supports like one-off, and you run build client SDL, it should produce schema without one-off, if one-off is missing in SDL. So, and more, it should fail if introspection is not there. it should check like for query root type for underscore schema underscore type. And if it's not there, it should fail. So it's not only spec changes, it's like implementation API changes and behavioral changes. So at least for GraphQL.js.
But this depends on which approach you like. Are you doing annotation based? Makes no sense. Like your server will not be changed at all because you're not even using a schema file.
Yeah,
Like,
but you
this is
create a memory
just
schema.
for
You have like
yeah,
one
you
memory schema, right? In
yes,
memory
but
schema,
that is
and it's executable, and it should execute introspection query.
yes,
What-
but what my point is, you don't have an input as a schema. Like what you pointed out is okay when you define such a schema and load it into your GraphQL server, but like depending on what approach you do in building your schema, you never write the schema file.
But in hot chocolate, you have a function that converts SDL into schema, right?
We can do a schema first. We can also mix, like you can have parts annotation based, parts code first, and parts schema first. Depends on what approach you want and how you want to mix them.
Yeah, and if you try to add your own implementation of introspection type,
So at the moment, like introspection is the one thing. If you try to modify it, like we're allowed to modify it, but then you have to be explicit about that. But
yeah,
if you just say, here's my
what about removing stuff?
No, we allow to add things. We allow
Okay.
people to essentially bring in new things, but you cannot like say, I want to change the part that is defined by the spec. So that's what we prevent, and then we would fail.
Yes, same with GraphQL.js, and it's not if I dump SDL from hot chocolate like a year ago with introspection types and try to put it in latest version of hot chocolate, it will either fail or like silently ignore like those types.
So we are not. We would fail. We would definitely fail because the moment you we would fail if you try to modify the part that we define as this is the internal introspection system, then we would fail. But we would like we have other so this is for the introspection. For things like scalars or directives, we would basically say, okay, this you are trying to do to define here the built-in type, for instance, string. You're defining here a string scalar. Okay, we don't allow you to replace it. Here is our string scalar. We do that in the way that you don't introduce things that are defined by the spec and introduce non-spec behavior for the core types.
Yeah,
but
short answer for you, Martin. Even if we change the spec and even if people change validation, I expect like implementation that libraries that powering with particular plugin, they probably need to do like code changes beyond relaxing validation rules. They need to do separate functions.
Yes, but like you're asking from a server standpoint, and as I understand, he's asking from a client standpoint. So
yeah,
he wants
library
to, as a consumer know what is in the server.
Yeah, library is the same. In most of the language, people use the same library. If it's like Java powered, it's like GraphQL Java needs to support both servers and clients.
Yeah, I mean, for the language server, we use completely different APIs because we want to also allow invalid syntax and things like that.
Oh, cool. In that case,
you need a complete different parser for that. Like, because like what we do for our language server is we even have like, for instance, if you write syntax, it's invalid, then we say, okay, if that is invalid syntax, we just imagine there were this token and then keep on parsing. It's a
Recoverable.
wholly different, yeah, it's a wholly different parser.
Yeah, it could be the same case in the GraphQL IntelliJ plugin. Because I know they use GraphQL Java for the parsing and a lot of the validation, but maybe not all of it. They also have a lot of custom code. I'll double check that.
Yeah, but the point is correct. It could be that this is not an easy change for, like, even if we put that in a spec, could be that libraries have to do a lot to get it supported.
So I guess my question now is, do we want to make the baby step and see later for the rest, or do we want to do everything all at once and basically introduce a new concept of a full schema in the spec? I think this is what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's still 2 steps, right? The first step is to disallow it. And the second step is to say, okay, you can have here this full schema approach.
I guess one question for my team is what prevents Apollo from not spitting out the scalar int or scalar string or the directive?
Scalars not so much. For directives, it's an edge case. We were discussing this with Benji. It's if someone writes a query that uses new introspection features, for example, the deprecated input arguments, then we cannot properly validate them, and we're back to no type safety.
So we need to solve this in one of a few, like, there's possible paths to solve this. One of the possible paths is that we allow full description of the full schema that you actually support. And if you're, for instance, missing one of in it, or you're missing at specified by, then we know, okay, you don't support that. We can validate when we see it not to allow you to do that. And then the other one is, like, for every new feature that we add some flag on the schema, something that tells us, hey, this is actually either this is the version of GraphQL that is supported here, and our validation knows what features are supported in which version, or these are the set of features that you've opted into. And we can actually say, oh, you didn't opt into the at specified by feature, so it's not available.
Yeah, I think it's create a problem that Anthony pointed out. If we use feature flag for syntax feature for language, it's easier. There is no interdependency. There is, like, imagine we added like defer but without a label, and later we decided to do a label. So now we in situation where there is, like, chain of feature flags. So I like current approach when you look at defer and see, like, if it's have label or not. And there is no, like, separate, we not add, like, separate flags, we not describe or enums or strings into spec and saying, like, there is, like, support for defer flags with label, without label. I'm like feature flag. I'm strongly for feature flag only for language features, because they're not in schema.
But I have one more, like, is it even the right approach to do that with the schema and the client? Like, isn't that already solvable, your problem with the standard introspection? Like, to figure things out and then create a config file that just has all the features aggregated in there. Like, this is what we detected in you. Like, it's can this, like, my question is more like, can this problem not be solved with an implementation approach on the client?
But that config file that you are mentioning, it's basically the schema. It's GraphQL language, and
yeah,
I think
could be, but it could, like, it's, for instance, what we do in distributed GraphQL setups. is we use a heavily annotated schema. So we inspect subgraphs, and then we heavily annotate these things in our GraphQL document. So features would be annotated. For instance, we use a schema definition, and then we have specific directives on there that tell us what the subgraph, for instance, supports. And I mean, it could be also solved in that way, and you have it much quicker.
But the issue remains.
No, you would. It depends on how you inspect. If you have an inspection tool that looks at the thing that you have, then it creates for you this schema file.
Oh,
and that's
so you would turn like directive definition, like for an example, the built-in include directive definition. You turn it into another directive that is completely unknown to the GraphQL spec.
That is
that what
a client
talking about?
Yeah, it's what Relay also has. They have a lot of Relay directives that only exist for Relay, and you can tell Relay with that certain behavior.
Yeah,
and they only exist on the client side, right? And then you don't have the problem actually.
We've kind of told people to use SDL because it's well defined, it's in the spec. People know, like when they look at the include directive definition, they know it's include. So
yeah,
we could introduce new language, but it means people have to learn this new language, and they have to learn it for every library out there.
It's not a new language. It's a standard GraphQL SDL. You can use a standard GraphQL SDL.
Oh yeah.
You just have.
What I mean is it's new directives, like a directive that would be specific to hot chocolate, for an example, that says one-off is supported like this. And maybe GraphQL Java is going to use another directive that is specific to GraphQL Java, and every library out there uses their own, which works. It's just that for someone that is reading the schema, it's weird because they have to relearn every time how to read the include directive, for an example, or something like this.
No, the include directive, I mean, these are standard things, but like for instance, I don't know, there are a couple of capabilities that you could annotate. Like I'm just saying that there are multiple ways to approach this problem. Like you don't have to wait for a spec proposal to add maybe also a lot of complexity to it. It's maybe not even needed.
I think we need to do it if we want to have SDL as first-class citizen. We need to start specifying everything.
Yeah, I agree. You should be able to tell if you've got a GraphQL operation, a GraphQL document, and you've got an SDL file that defines a schema, you should be able to tell whether that operation is valid against that schema. And for non-introspection things, that is true, excluding what we've discussed today with the bang and with the fragment arguments. But at the moment, that is true until you put introspection fields into your query, into your document. Once those introspection fields are in your document, you no longer know whether they're supported or not by that schema because there's no indication of what that is. If we indicate that, whether it be by including the introspection types and fields into the scheme, into the SDL, or whether it be by adding schema directives like Michael suggests, which is also a perfectly valid way of doing it, it doesn't really matter so long as whatever approach is standardized. And I think I agree with Martin in this case that it's much easier to standardize the SDL as just printing the introspection schema because we already have rules for that. Whereas if we were to standardize it by introducing these schema directives, we would need to have ones that indicate every single, potential field that we might add at any point in the introspection schema. And I think that could become more cumbersome.
I'm just thinking about it this way, that it could be very difficult because when you have now schema, like I think also from a server side now, and that's just because Ivan talked about that. When you start putting introspection types in there, like we would fail. And like, what does it mean if you put introspection types suddenly into the schema and feed that into a schema first GraphQL server? Does it mean that I want the introspection system maybe to drop fields that are there by spec? What does it mean to
No,
us?
It's not
Yeah, I'm just saying. Suddenly we have to also deal with these effects because you're allowing to put that system in there. So we also have to deal with what is if a GraphQL server loads it in. Do we ignore it? Could also be like we specify all the cases around that, like ignore that if it's read in. It can only be for client-side schemas or whatever. I'm just saying there's a lot of while it doesn't felt like a lot of complication to me in the first place, like there could be an impact to the wider ecosystem that we have.
Yeah, very good points. This has been an excellent discussion, and I think it has blown up a lot more than Martin was expecting. Nonetheless, we are now 5 minutes over time.
Cool stuff, though, so thank you, everyone.
So I'd like to call this meeting to a close, but I look forward to discussing it again in future meetings. Thank you, everyone. Oh, go on, Matt.
One very quick thing. We don't have a meeting scheduled or it's not on the agendas list for next month. We should action item. Somebody
Lee needs to run his script.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Thought the same thing.
Action item. Okay. Cool. Sorry about that.
All right. Thanks, Matt.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.